to the channel, and I just got back from Trevor's house. We just watched UFC 268, Colby versus Usman Part 2, lots of other good fights. So just going to go over the results with you guys and talk about my thoughts on all of these fights because it was a really good fight card. So with that being said, it's the second time we're experiencing 1 o'clock in the morning here in NC, so thanks to Daylight Savings Time. Let's just get right into these fights so I can go to bed soon, preferably. Alright, so UFC 268 took place in Madison Square Garden. Of course, it is the most historic fight venue in all of combat sports history, probably one of the most important venues in the history of sport. And it is a modern-day Roman Coliseum, and it certainly brought out that energy in tonight's fights. We saw a ton of finishes and a ton of just extremely high-quality fights. You know, I'm not really one to talk about the early goings of a fight card or the early prelims on a fight card too much, but I will say that this one had some great fights, starting with that Dustin Jacoby versus John Allen fight. You know, John Allen's that guy who had his teeth broken a couple months ago. Not a great guy to come back against is Dustin Jacoby. His striking is just too clean, and Trevor Hayes is just blown away by how good this guy is on the feet and the things he's able to do and make people do on the feet. The way he's able to just kind of bring people into his strikes as a counter striker at light heavyweight. You know, that's a pretty big deal. You know, we haven't really seen a great short punch striker like him, or a straight long punch sniper, counter striker like him in lightweight in a very long time. Light heavyweight, sorry. And yeah, I think he's got, you know, potential to be fighting somebody much higher ranked next time, because he made this one, frankly, look a little easy, but it was a showcase for him. He looked phenomenal. And then we have 265-pound John Vellante taking on Chris Barnett, and man, John didn't look great. Things have changed a lot since that Sean O'Connell Fight of the Year contender he had way back in the day on the Wonder Boy versus Rory card. He did not look great at any point in this fight. Neither one of these guys looked great at any point in this fight until the Beast Boy landed a signature, a career-defining wheel kick for him. You know, he's known for throwing a lot of spinning stuff, having that Taekwondo background, but to see him land that kick in the biggest fight of his career, I mean, it would have been great if he would have landed against Rothwell and taken him out, but I don't think really anybody expected him to beat Rothwell or even to perform decently well versus Rothwell. So yeah, I mean, he came into this fight as an underdog. I bet on him, got a little bit of money off of him, so shout out to the Beast Boy for that. Spinning wheel kick, man, one of the best ones you'll ever see too, as far as like the heel going into the side of the head, the spin being accurate, especially for a guy his size, throwing that with that kind of force, accuracy, power. It's a big ask, and he made it look flawless on the finish there. I mean, he only could have done better if he flatlined him, but nobody's flatlining John Vellante. The dude is just tough as nails. But yeah, John just kept kind of plodding forward. His legs looked like shit. Every time he got kicked in the legs, he became like a turtle shell fighter. He stopped moving completely every time his legs got touched, and you never want to really see that. And leg kicks, man, they were all over this whole fight card. Really, they were career defining for a lot of fighters, or fight defining rather. Sorry. Like I said, it is late. Then in the main event of the early prelims, you had Ian Gary, a new prospect from Ireland, coming up with 1 second left in the round and flatlining Jordan Williams. Is one of the most beautiful knockouts you'll see, I would say, in your life. But as I get older, knockouts like this are becoming more and more common because strikers like Ian Gary are becoming more and more common. But make no mistake, in the UFC, especially in the welterweight division, you're not going to see a lot of guys that can slide out of the way like that and deliver that bomb across the line. And it was very reminiscent of a Conor McGregor or even like a Sugar Sean O'Malley, the way he threw that thing. But this is a much bigger boy. And yeah, he did look a little sloppy. And he does tend to just get hit really hard because he retreats with his hands low. They did mention that in the broadcast booth, and I picked up on the same thing similarly. But yeah, Ian Gary might be somebody to watch, man. Might be somebody to watch. Training out of Florida now. Apparently has a really good team behind him. So, I'd love to see what somebody with that level of talent does when they commit after almost getting, I don't think he was ever really rocked. He was hit really hard, but one or two more punches when he was kind of rocked hard earlier in the fight maybe could have been enough to put him out. It certainly bloodied his face, and like he said in his post-fight interview, he felt nerves for the first time in an octagon. So I'm interested to see what happens with Ian Gary. Of course, always interested to follow Irish fighters, an Irishman myself. So I am curious what they do with him next, because they have had a potentially a change of pace or a change of heart lately when it comes to these prospect fighters. Matching Ian Gary up with a guy like Jordan Williams, who is so game and so experienced under the UFC lights, is a test. And they're more into testing these guys earlier and then building them up later. Instead of building them up early like they do in boxing, they kind of test certain things to get them out of the way. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Alex Pereira fight on the prelims, but when it comes to the prospects lately, they like to put certain challenges in front of them earlier in the past couple years to kind of weed out who's legit and who's not. Because you can get behind a guy and push him all the way to the belt really, really fast. They figured out how to do that really well after the Conor era, and for a while even, it worked out pretty well for them because Conor destroyed Eddie Alvarez and built a whole another level of the sport in terms of popularity. But sometimes you get behind a guy and you push him to the belt as fast as possible, and he's Darren Till. He's a great fighter, but if you push guys too far too fast to that title shot, sometimes they don't ever come back the same from it. They don't ever look as good as they did when you were building them up, because they've kind of, the blueprint on how to beat them has been put out there, and they haven't been given that time to really develop before they got to that level where everybody can use that kind of blueprint, if that makes any sense. So early prelims, very, very good stuff, very entertaining stuff, and a great way to start the fight card off, because so often these early prelims, especially at these live shows, are kind of stinkers, and I think they kind of match made this one in a way that got the crowd really excited, because while this crowd was not the most friendly crowd, they were very into the fights, very entertained by the fights for the most part. ESPN Plus prelims, or wait, ESPN prelims, I guess you could say, because I couldn't watch them on ESPN Plus. I had to find a stream for them. But Edmund Shabazian slides to a 0-3 skit as he gets smashed out from the crucifix by Nasruddin Imavov, or Imavov. Anyway, some Eastern European motherfucker smashed out Edmund Shabazian in 2 rounds. And, man, I don't know what's going on with Edmund. But, 3 fights ago, he was the guy that was favored to beat Brunson. And now he's losing to some guy whose last name is Imavov. So, he's a tough young kid. And he's obviously got great striking talent. And even some great striking for the middleweight division, but man, he just cannot put it together when it comes to being pressured by a wrestler. He cannot get off the cage to save his life. He can't really back away at all. I mean, it's pretty tough to watch him try to compete against a wrestler, honestly, because he just doesn't seem to really have anything to offer in terms of defense, like not even a knee up the middle or anything. And when you're a striker like that, you gotta at least be throwing knees up the middle, like Cheeto did a good job of threatening the knee up the middle, even when Frankie wasn't really shooting in. He had to kind of worry about that later on in the fight card. So that being said, what's next for Edmund? I don't know. Hopefully they don't cut him, because he is 0-3. But I think cutting him might not be the worst thing that ever happened to him. Like, he could go to a promotion like Bellator, which doesn't have a great middleweight division, by the way, at least until you get to those top couple guys. And look great, look like a dominant champion or a dominant fighter for a while, but eventually he will come up against another one of those Eastern European wrestlers, because as prevalent as they are in the UFC, they're popping their heads up over there in Bellator as well. So eventually you've just got to learn how to deal with the fucking wrestling, man. And I know it sucks, but that's what's next for him if he wants to continue being an elite MMA fighter, at least. Chris Curtis got the round 1 KO against Philip Haas. That was a great KO, and it's nice to see him get back in the win column. I love Chris Curtis. Bobby Green dismantles Raging Al Iaquinta, made it look easy throughout the whole fight, and then blasted him kind of midway through that first round and put him in the ground, bro. Like, I've never seen Al get murked like that. And Bobby's got an insanely good jab. And a lot of people forget that, Bobby Green, that's a guy who has done it all and seen it all and beat them all, really, in terms of in the sparring room. He hasn't necessarily had that shine on a grand stage like the UFC in terms of, he's had some great fights. People know that he's not going to be in boring fights, but let's just take a look at his record here. His victory over Fiziev, that was kind of like a moment where people started to respect him more, but he lost the decision to Fiziev, but people started to respect him a lot more. But yeah, Clay Guida, Eric Koch, if you look at the people he's lost to, it says more than the people he's won against, if that makes any sense. Like, his best losses, he performed, very well in. Edson Barboza went the distance with, lost. Went to a draw with Lando Vernada when Lando was a badass. Clay Guida, unanimous decision win. Lando Vernada with the rematch, he won. And another great fight. Dustin Poirier, of course, he lost to round 1 on 199. But yeah, Bobby Green, he's been around forever, and he showed it tonight that he's been around forever for a reason, and they've kept him for a reason. Because one, he always puts on great fights, even if he gets beaten or if he has to fight it out to a draw like he did against Lando, he puts on a great fight, and he's a very entertaining guy too. So I don't see them doing anything different than what they have been doing with Bobby. I don't see him necessarily moving up and challenging anybody else for any kind of significant fight or any kind of significant ranking, but he'll always be there to give us a fun fight and to give us a scrap. Alex Pereira taking on Andreas Michailidis in the main event of the prelims. This is kind of what I was talking about when I was talking about prospects earlier. Alex Pereira, definitely a prospect to say the least, making his UFC debut, 3-1, 3 straight finishes in the MMA, and he was tested in the first round with the grappling, and he did not look as good as I would like to see him look if he's going to be talking about fighting Israel. But luckily, he didn't really talk about that very much. He just kind of fly-kneed this dude and said, I'm going to keep getting better and I'm going to keep coming up the rankings. And I think if he wins 3 in a row, he'll probably be fighting Israel. You got to think, they put him with this Michailidis guy for a reason. Kind of like I was saying earlier, they knew Michailidis was a black belt. They knew Michailidis was a decent wrestler for this weight class, for this ranking. So they wanted to kind of put him in front of Alex and be like, hey, can you deal with somebody who's going to shoot on you? Because this guy's definitely going to shoot on you. Because there's no other way for him to win. He can't outstrike you. So, the UFC is very consciously making this match. Because if they wanted to, they could have just put him in there with a straight-up kickboxer, had him get this flying knee finish, and then call out Israel and rush him to the car. They don't want to rush him, and he doesn't seem to be in a rush either. So I'm really excited to see what happens with Alex Pereira, because he's such an entertaining striker, and I really don't feel like we got to see much of his striking in this fight. We saw about a minute and a half of his neutral game in the first round. He landed some clean leg kicks especially, but nothing crazy up top. Then he gets taken down and controlled for most of the round, and then as soon as that second round starts, he flying knees Andreas into the 4th row. And so I'm really curious to see who they match him up against next, because I feel like it's going to be a guy right outside or right at that 15 rank, just to get him as far as they can without over pushing him. If he can fight somebody in the top 15 and look as good as Billy Quarantillo did later on, we'll talk about that, then they got one. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, keep a close eye on Alex Pereira. Definitely a guy that could be fighting for a UFC belt in a year's time if he looks as good as he did tonight against next up-and-coming opponents here. All right, main card time, baby, main card time. This was not quite as eventful in terms of the KOs, TKOs, etc. The main card was more technical fights that were still entertaining, but the crowd was super, super hot from all those finishes back to back to back, six in a row, right? So Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler, kicking the card off because Trevor Whitman didn't want to go back to back to back to back, or I guess the UFC didn't want him to do that. Something changed because I remember that in the original battle order, Gaethje and Chandler were probably going to be, right before the main event. But I think it's a genius idea to start these two guys off in the first fight because you're pretty sure they're going to have a banger. There's no such thing as a guaranteed banger in the words of Jack Slack, of course, but if there's two guys you can count on to deliver a banger, it's going to be Chandler and Gaethje. And I felt like they delivered tonight, obviously. Fight of the year, in my opinion. Everything advertised, extremely violent, extremely crazy. During the first round of this fight in particular, when we were watching, me and Trevor were just nonstop, like screaming, laughing, giggling like little girls because of how insane it was. It was just an insane round. It reminded me so much of Czech Congo Pat Barry, where guys are just getting hurt and they're exchanging. Chandler looked amazing like he always does in the first 2 minutes, but after those first 2 minutes he gets progressively slower and slower and weaker and weaker. And I was actually surprised with how much pop he was able to keep on his shots going later and later and later into the fight, right? Yeah, Gaethje, man, he is truly the UFC's most violent man. He put Chandler into a blender. And by that fifth round, even though Chandler was landing some big shots still and still obviously had some power, he was just lost in there. And it looked a lot like what happened between him and Tony Ferguson. But he had 5 rounds to do what he did to Tony Ferguson. He did this to Chandler in 3, so I couldn't imagine what Chandler would have looked like going another 2 rounds with him. So I'm actually pretty glad that they did this one on a big card instead of doing it on a fight night, because they easily could have made this a huge ratings fight night between these guys. Both these guys are must-see TV, and I can't wait to see what they do with either of them. I obviously think Justin should fight for the title again. I think he could probably beat Charles. I don't know if he can beat Dustin, but I think he has a shot to beat Dustin because there were moments in that Dustin-Justin fight way back in the day, 4 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago now, that looked like Justin could have won, especially Justin 2.0, Justin 2.50. Whatever we're seeing now is a higher level of Justin. But you also got to think that Poirier's come so far in that time as well. So I'm really curious to see who wins that title fight, because I think that's going to determine what they actually do as far as who they book to fight or who they book to fight the winner, if it is Islam or if it is Justin, because I do think that they want to put Islam in that slot. I think that's the promotional goal. But if you have Justin fight the winner and he wins, Khabib's already laid out the Dagestani blueprint for him. So in my opinion, out of all 3 guys, he's the easiest matchup for Islam. So I don't know what they do. But Justin Gaethje, never going to miss a Justin Gaethje fight since his first night in the UFC. When he was coming over from LFA, what was it even called back then? The PFL before it was the PFL, the World Fighting League, WFL, whatever it was called. When he came over, I was like, guys, you cannot miss this guy. I don't know if he's going to be a UFC champion or anything like that, or if he's going to be a top guy, but he's an insane fighter. And he had that first fight with Michael Johnson. I remember 9 of my friends were watching, and some of them got into MMA that night after that fight. Justin Gaethje always brings it. Speaking of always bringing it, 2 guys that definitely always bring it, and definitely the reason why they were matched up, Bill and Quarantino. Shane Burgos had an amazing fight too. Hard to have fight of the night on the same card, especially following up Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje. And I think a lot of fans even in the building watched Justin versus Michael Chandler, and they were just like, I need to leave. I need to go outside and walk around a little bit because it was way too quiet for how good this fight was in the arena. Shane Burgos, Billy Quarantino put on a hell of a fight, scrapping, and Shane Burgos comes away with the win. I thought Billy Quarantino just could not do enough in the 3rd round. It might have been 1-1, but it was probably 2-1 Shane. It might have been 1-1 going into the 3rd, but it was probably 2-0 Shane. But could have been 1-1, but in that last round, the leg was just so compromised. Shane just kept destroying the leg of Billy Quarantino. But Billy Quarantino really impressed me with how he was going forward through Shane's shots and how he was not willing to make it the kind of fight where Shane could easily win, which is a at distance pitter patter boxing fight. He kept it in a phone booth with him and just ran straight at him the whole 15 minutes. Even when his leg got fucked up, he was still just coming forward and diving on, singles that weren't happening, all kinds of stuff. So, Billy Q can definitely hang with the top 15 at featherweight. I imagine that he might be ranked 15 after this, and Shane will go up. But either way, he's going to be fighting in the top 15 in the future. And Shane, who knows what's next for him, man? But he skated by on this one. I think I think this is a fight that, based on the odds at least, a lot of people were expecting him to KO Billy, and Billy just kind of showed up. In my opinion, Billy fought above his usual level tonight, and Shane fought below his usual level. As someone who's watched a ton of both of their fights, I can't really articulate in this particular video. I don't have the time to break down the actual fight itself and explain why I believe that, but I'm curious to know if you guys thought the same, if you guys had the same kind of watching experience, if you've watched a lot of Shane Burgos fights. I felt like he was just a little step behind where he usually is. That being said, the trifecta of fights that ended our card in Madison Square Garden were great fights. And they started off with Frankie Edgar versus Marlon Vera. Frankie looked amazing for the first 2 rounds. He really started to slow down when Marlon started throwing body kicks up the middle with the front kick. And that front kick would eventually rear its head later as he went, feigning it, as he had put it in the body so many times. When he raised his foot to put it down the middle, Frankie kind of leaned forward to hide his body, and then Marlon just started switching it up and going to the head. And it was only the second attempt, really, but he timed it perfectly. And even though Frankie wasn't necessarily completely flatlined or KO'd there, really good stoppage in my opinion. I just hate seeing Frankie get finished, and I'm getting about damn tired of it. So, Frankie's got nothing left to prove, but they got to stop putting him up against these guys that are legitimate contenders. I don't know if Vera is ready to compete with the best bantamweights in the world, but Frankie's definitely not anymore. So we're going to find out what Marlon's got in his next fight, and we're going to find out what's left for Frankie here coming up soon. Because if the UFC doesn't cut him off of this and they give him another fight, they need to give him somebody like a legacy fight. It's one of the old guy fights, traditional fights, whatever you want to call it. Co-main event of the evening, Rose Namajunas, the Thug Rose, taking on Weili Zhang, or Zhang Weili, depending on who you talk to. I saw a lot of people online saying that they thought Zhang won this, and I don't see how you could think that. Actually, I do see how you could think that, because it's a pretty close fight overall. But when you talk about the round-by-round scoring system, especially in New York City where they use the new modified rules, you have to understand that the 10-8s are a little bit more liberal, or at least there should be in theory, right? And that it kind of re-evaluates the hierarchy of scoring from the previous rule set. So instead of just effective striking, effective grappling, and effective cage work, it kind of prioritizes different things and kind of gets a little bit more specific as far as the scoring criteria goes. And New York City's never had another rule set because they're still such a new commission compared to other commissions in the nation. So I'm not surprised at all that Rose won that, and I think that if this was in Vegas, Rose would have won like 3 rounds too, on every scorecard. And on some scorecards, you can maybe even say she won 4-1 if you really are looking for control on some of these takedowns. Because, yes, Zhang was able to get takedowns during certain rounds, and even in the 3rd round, I think she ended up in mount on top. But ending up in a position is not enough to win you a round when the 4 minutes and 50 seconds before that happened, you were getting outclassed on the feet, you were swinging, but when you were swinging, you were being made to miss wide, and when you were wrestling, you're expending a lot of time and energy to get a position rather than get damage or submission attempt. And when you're a judge, it's hard to really value just the control or the position if nothing comes from it. Especially when you get into a debate about what a takedown is and what a takedown isn't, like they did on commentary during the main event. When you start to break down the rules into those very specific gray areas, you start to begin to see how subjective MMA scoring is, and why you could have so many people online say that the first 3 rounds were for Zhang, when in reality, those first 3 rounds were almost all Rose, and then 15 seconds of Zhang kind of implementing some kind of game, which is wrestling. And I really feel like the problem with Zhang Weili in this fight was that she fought way too outside of her wheelhouse. Like, me and Trevor were kind of commenting on the fact that she wrestled a shitload compared to what she normally wrestles, and it tired her out. I didn't think it was possible for her to get tired before this fight, but she was wrestling so much and moving around so much too that she was tired by like the third round, midway through the third round. When she came back to her stool in the second round, she was grabbing the fence and kind of pulling down on the fence. That's something that I see people do when their arms are killing them from squeezing or from, holding on to somebody. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's not good. She doesn't really have good squeeze muscles, And Rose is not a scrub on the ground by any means. I thought Rose looked really good on the ground, especially in the fifth round when she was able to hit that beautiful Chael Sonnen blast double right into the half guard, and then it was just game over from there. In my opinion, the fifth round was an easy 10-8. I think a lot of people don't want to say that, but I don't know how the judges' scorecards actually break down point-wise, but if I were to explain how you could get to a 49-46 for Rose, it would be a 10-8 in the fifth round. There just wasn't any sufficient offense from Zhang Weili to constitute a 10-9 for me. And, I just think that Zhang tried to fight like she was Jessica Andrade. She was throwing every shot with so much power. She clearly wanted to KO Rose. And she clearly was also very worried about being a stationary target for Rose. She's doing a lot of the in and out movement that she's kind of well known for in other fights, but she sets up her power strikes with that movement. This fight, she was moving back and forth and then waiting on Rose to throw a strike, and then when Rose would throw, she would stop and then throw like from way back, like cocking way back. And when you start cocking back like that against a striker of Rose's caliber, especially when they have a reach advantage on you like she has on Zhang, she's just going to jab your face off. And that's kind of what I saw over and over again popping up, was a miss from Zhang Weili followed by some kind of strike, either a leg kick or a jab from Rose. And if I'm a judge, that's what I value. I value that way more than I value 10 seconds of grappling control near the end of the round, just because it happens at the end of the round. And I think that a lot of people who watch these fights get way caught up on stuff like that. They get way caught up on the idea of like stealing around. And I think that Yoel Romero actually did a lot to like push that narrative out there, forward more to the front line, that because his strategy, especially in his later UFC career, was to just stand there doing nothing for like as long as possible, so that in the last minute or the last 50 seconds of a round, he could explode and try to steal it, and that's kind of gotten fans to this mindset of stealing rounds. And I just don't think that's not how round by round scoring works in general. You're judging the round as a whole, and then you separate yourself from the round for the next round. You don't judge the fight on a scale. You don't judge rounds on a scale either. So, that being said, I really don't see the consensus for Zhang Weili 3-2. I definitely see it more towards 49-46 for Rose than 48-47 for Rose, because I once again think that last round is a 10-8. But enough ranting about the co-main event. I spent a lot of time talking about it because I think it was like the best fight on the card, pretty much, was Rose versus Weili. This fight, Kumaru Usman versus Colby Covington, not as good as their first fight by any means. And when Colby was walking out and he was in the pre-fight ritual where Bruce Buffer's announcing him and all that stuff, me and Trevor were like, why is his energy so weird? Like, why is his energy all over the place? Why is he not looking like he's ready for this? Why is he turning his back on Kumaru? And sure enough, in those first 2 rounds, he looked frozen. Like, he looked lost in there against Kumaru. Kumaru just looked way too good for the first 2 rounds, and Colby just was not coming forward. Colby just kind of really sat on his back foot and let Kumaru back him up. I mean, he was unrecognizable to me in the first 2 rounds. Like even how he fought later in the fight, I thought was a little bit, suspect from him. He did not look like himself at all. This is a guy who, threw a billion significant strikes against Tyron Woodley or something like that. He put up crazy numbers, and he wasn't really against. He's not killing people with power punches, but he gets off being a volume striker. The volume striking that leads to the wrestling. And he just did not have any volume. He did not have any pressure. He was going backwards for most of the fight. And I just think it comes from the new camp and the new style. It just doesn't really mesh well with who he is because, they're kind of making him into this weirder, slower, faintier fighter. And he's not built for that. He should be playing more to his strengths. He should have, like Daniel Cormier actually said in 5th round, he needed to cause a little bit more chaos throughout the entire fight. He only really woke up and got going at all after Kumaru almost finished him in the 2nd. He landed some punches in the 3rd, and I think he landed hard enough. And when he saw Kumaru kind of like wobble onto his back foot, he was like, "Wait a minute, I'm in this fight. Like I can punch this guy." And then in the 4th and 5th rounds, especially in the 4th round, I will say, he was awake and he was doing stuff, but he still wasn't looking like old Colby. He wasn't looking like the Colby from the first fight. Not by any means. He was just landing, but not in the usual way that he does. So, yeah, I mean, Colby versus Kumaru, I don't want to see it again. I hope they never do it again. I'd rather see Kumaru fight Vicente Luque. I think Vicente Luque's got something for him because Vicente Luque hits way harder than Colby and can hit you way easier than Colby was hitting him in this. And I just think Kumaru has this like air of invincibility about him that a lot of fighters who go up against him get kind of caught up in. And I'm interested to see if Vicente Luque can kind of power through that mental barrier, because so far it seemed like Kumaru just really gets in people's heads by doing nothing but just existing and being just a jacked dude from Nigeria who can wrestle fuck you. I mean, I really don't know what else to say about it other than like he seems to make people nervous. You'll remember that when he was looking for fights on his way up those rankings, it was so hard for him to get a fight because he was such an intimidating prospect. Now he's the champion, and you have to fight him to get the belt, and nobody's really calling him out. Nobody's really angling for a fight with him except for the number one guy in the world, Vicente Luque and Colby Covington. And sure, it's also because almost everybody else that stood at this level has been decimated by him already. So, I do not see Leon Edwards having anything for him. I don't see a lot of guys that are in this top 10 for welterweight having anything for Kumaru. So I think if Colby comes back and wins, especially if he makes it look easy in his next one, they'll do this again. To my dismay, they will do this again. But -320 for Usman, +250 for Colby. That's probably the best price you're ever going to get on Colby. If they fight again, I think the odds will be much closer. Weird for Zhang Li to get knocked out in the last fight and close as the betting favorite in this fight and then still lose on a split. But yeah, just a good night of fights, man. I don't know what it is about MSG, but it brings out the best in these fighters. It is something about the spirit of that place. It's very magical. I've never attended a fight at MSG, but I attended a concert there, and I got to see kind of the fight wing. I was taken back there to the fight wing, and I got to see a lot of the items and the memorabilia they have from across the years. And it's palpable, man. You walk through there, you can feel that energy. So I'm sure walking through there, warming up in the back, I'm sure these guys feel it too, because it brings out some great fights. I mean, the MSG with GSP and Bisping is the best UFC card, one of the best UFC cards top to bottom ever. Of course, you got UFC 205 where Conor McGregor defeated Eddie Alvarez in the main event, which also had a great night of fights before that. And yeah, MSG just always delivers, and I'm super glad the UFC went back there. I loved UFC 268, a pay-per-view, finally a pay-per-view worth paying for from the UFC for the first time in like a year plus, and a pay-per-view that delivered on all its promises. And there's nothing really that the promoters can do about that. You can bill Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler as the most violent fight in the world all day long, but it's up to those two guys to go in there at the end of the day and fucking deliver, and they did. 100% fight of the night, 100% knockout of the night's going to Barnett. In my eyes, it doesn't get better than that. Yeah, fight of the night, Chandler Gaethje. Performance of the night, hard to say. You want to say you give it to Usman, but you know, maybe it goes to Vera. I don't know. I haven't looked. I'm sure they've actually already announced who had them by now, but I just drove home from the card and drove straight here to do this video. So my picks would definitely be Vera for performance of the night, bonus to Beast Boy for the spinning wheel kick knockout, and then fight of the night, fight of the year, Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje. Can't wait to watch that one again tomorrow. I hope I can find a decent recording of it or a VOD of it. But that being said, guys, thanks for stopping by. What did you think of UFC 268? Did you think Zhang Weili was robbed? I won't judge you personally if you do, but we could talk about it in the comments below. I can try to fix you. You know? We'll see. But anyway, thanks guys for stopping by the video. Hope you guys enjoy the week coming up here. Probably going to have some videos out soon. I want to do another fight forensics video, but I'm looking for a subject. So if you have any ideas on who I should make a video about, I'm thinking maybe Ian Gary, but I'm not 100% sold on that idea. Do let me know in the comments down below. And that being said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.